The universe is mostly quiet. Not silent in the way a room is silent, but empty in a way that feels endless. Space stretches outward without sound, without air, without witnesses. For centuries, humans looked into this darkness and heard nothing answering back. Stars burned. Planets turned. The universe did not speak. That was the expectation in the early years of the deep space listening era. Scientists built instruments not to speak, but to listen. Large radio dishes rested in deserts and on lonely plateaus, slowly turning their metal faces toward the sky. They were patient machines built for waiting. Most of the time, they received only natural noise pulsars, ticking like distant clocks. Solar winds brushing past Earth. Static shaped by physics older than life itself. The people who worked there learned to enjoy the boredom. Long shifts. Soft lights. Screens filled with slow-moving lines and numbers. Many described it as peaceful. Some said it felt like watching the universe breathe. On one ordinary night, the data behaved as expected. Background radiation. Familiar patterns. Nothing new then. For just under 2 seconds, something changed. It arrived without warning. A signal thin, precise, and impossibly clean rose above the noise. It was not loud. It did not announce itself. It simply appeared as if it had always been there and someone had briefly turned a dial dot. At first, the system flagged it as an error. Errors were common. A satellite passing too close. A glitch in calibration. A reflection off space debris. The automated software marked it, logged it, and moved on. But the signal returned, same frequency. Same duration. Same unnatural clarity. It did not drift the way cosmic noise usually did. It did not weaken. It did not scatter. It behaved as if it were controlled, measured, intentional. The technician on duty noticed the repetition hours later, while sipping cold coffee and watching the data scroll by. He leaned closer to the screen, squinting, checking timestamps. The signal had appeared again and again, always at the same interval, always from the same point in the sky. No known object occupied that region. He did not feel fear at first, only curiosity. Curiosity mixed with a strange sense of being noticed by the end of the shift. The signal had appeared 7 times. It was logged carefully, labeled cautiously, and forwarded for review. Outside the facility, the desert wind moved softly across the ground. The stars overhead remained unchanged. From Earth, everything looked exactly as it always had, but somewhere far beyond the reach of light and language, something had spoken, and it was waiting. When the signal reached the analysis team, it was treated gently. Not because it seemed dangerous, but because it seemed fragile. Like a rare sound that might disappear if handled too roughly. They isolated it from the background noise and stretched it across larger displays. The waveform was smooth, too smooth. Natural signals usually carried rough edges, scars from the chaos of space. This one looked polished, almost careful. At first, no one suggested intelligence. That word carried too much weight. Instead, they spoke in safer terms. Anomaly, unidentified source, unusual repetition. They ran the signal through filters designed to break patterns apart. Nothing changed. It remained stable, predictable. That was when someone noticed the pauses between each burst of sound. There was silence, not random silence, but silence of equal length every time. The timing was exact, not close. Exact. The room grew quieter as this realization settled in. Patterns are rare in space. Patterns that repeat without decay are rarer still. A mathematician was brought in, then another. They measured intervals, ratios, spacing. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to agree on something. No one wanted to say out loud the signal was structured. It was not language as humans understood it. no words, no melody. But structure itself can be a form of communication. A way of saying, I exist. Late into the night, someone overlaid the signal intervals onto a simple numerical scale. The alignment was perfect. Prime numbers. Small at first, then larger, then stopping abruptly, as if the sender had decided that was enough. No. Natural process produced primes on purpose. Someone whispered the question before the room was ready to hear it. Could it be artificial? No one answered right away. They checked everything again. Instrument error, reflection, hidden satellites. Nothing explained it. The source point in space remained empty, no star, no galaxy, no known object. The signal did not come from nearby. Calculations suggested it had traveled for thousands of years before reaching Earth. Whatever sent it had existed long before human history had a name. That night, the signal arrived again right on time as it played through the speakers at low volume. It sounded like breathing through metal, slow, even, patient, somewhere in the dark. Something had learned how to knock, and it had chosen Earth. The question was no longer what the signal was. The question was what to do about it. For decades, scientists had debated this moment in theory. Protocols existed, written carefully and revised endlessly. Most assumed the first contact, if it ever came, would be obviously unmistakable. It's impossible to ignore. This was neither loud nor obvious. This was quiet. The signal did not change when Earth noticed it. It did not grow stronger or weaker. It did not react. It simply continued, repeating its careful pattern into the void. Some argued it was a beacon. Others said it was a test. A few worried it was not meant for Earth at all, but the idea that unsettled everyone most was the simplest one. What if it was waiting for an answer? A small group was formed, operating quietly, away from headlines and public fear. They reviewed the old rules and quietly bent them. No one spoke about messages or replies. They spoke about echoes, about reflections if the universe had spoken. Perhaps it was only polite to acknowledge the sound. The response they prepared was simple, mathematical, safe, a mirror of what had been received. Reshaped slightly to show understanding but not invitation. They transmitted at low power, aimed precisely at the source. The message was brief. It said only this: we hear you. The dish turned slowly. The signal left Earth, thinning as it traveled, fading into distances humans could barely imagine. Then they waited. Hours passed. Then days, nothing changed. Relief spread quietly through the team. Perhaps that was it. A strange event, a moment in cosmic history, now complete. Then, exactly 48 hours later, the incoming signal changed. The pattern was still there. The primes remained. But something new had been added, something that matched the structure of Earth's reply. Not an echo, an answer. And this time, it did not stop. As the signal continued to arrive, its changes were subtle but undeniable. And at first, the listening teams treated it with caution, noting only small variations in timing and frequency that could easily be dismissed as interference. Yet, over hours and days, patterns began to emerge, showing deliberate alignment with Earth's own transmissions. A response that was not loud or immediate, but measured and patient. And as the scientists observed the behavior, a quiet sense of realization settled in. This was no longer just noise to study. It was something that could react, that could acknowledge, and the room itself seemed to grow heavier with the awareness of being observed, while the signal maintained its calm, repeating its adjusted pattern with precise intervals that suggested calculation and intention. And despite the lack of spectacle, a subtle tension threaded through every monitoring station, a tension born not of fear but of comprehension. That whatever existed in the dark had begun to understand humanity's ability to listen, adapting in a way that felt personal and deliberate, making the act of observation itself part of the signal's unfolding process. As the analysis continued, the team realized the signal was doing something impossible. It seemed to account for human attention, arriving with greater clarity when someone actively monitored it and dimming slightly when left unattended. And though the change was subtle, repeated observations confirmed that the signal structure was not random but responsive, almost considerate, like a presence aware of who was listening and how they were listening. And this realization spread quietly among the staff, bringing both awe and unease, because the signal was not only distant and ancient, but somehow intimately tied to human perception, shaping itself through observation and as days turned into weeks. Some team members reported dreams filled with the soft rhythm of the signal, sensations of presence and quiet attention in the void. And while science struggled to quantify the experience, everyone agreed on the emotional effect the universe had answered. And the answer had patience, restraint, and intent, teaching humanity how to observe before demanding a response. And in this gentle exchange, a new kind of connection had formed. One that was not physical, not verbal, but perceptual. A shared awareness stretching across space and time. Eventually, the team understood that the signal was waiting for something more than mere detection. It was waiting for acknowledgement for the human capacity to perceive it fully and consistently. And when they finally attempted to send a small, carefully measured response mimicking its mathematical patterns, the signal changed once again, incorporating the response into its structure with a subtle precision that no automated system could replicate. And the effect was profound, quieting the room as everyone paused to watch the unfolding adaptation, realizing that this was a mutual act of existence, not communication in the conventional sense. And though nothing violent or alarming occurred, a strange reverence filled the air, because the universe had not simply sent a signal but had orchestrated a patient exchange, proving that the act of listening mattered, that attention could be returned, and that some entity far beyond human comprehension had now taken note of Earth, not as a target or subject, but as a participant. A careful acknowledgement that left a lingering, unsettling weight in the minds of all who witnessed it. As the weeks passed, the signal became a constant presence in the listening facilities, arriving so reliably that it began to shape the rhythm of work itself. And those assigned to monitor it for long periods found their sense of time subtly altered, because hours spent listening felt shorter, while time away from the signal seemed oddly stretched. And though no alarms were raised, many listeners described a growing sense of immersion, as if the signal created a space that one entered simply by paying attention. And within that space, distractions faded, thoughts slowed, and awareness narrowed gently toward the quiet patterns unfolding on the screens. And while this focus improved analytical performance, it also carried an emotional weight that was difficult to define. A feeling not of threat, but of being included in something ongoing and ancient. And as senior researchers rotated out, younger listeners took their place, unaware at first of how deeply the signal could settle into perception. And slowly, without instruction or agreement, those who stayed the longest began to treat listening not as a task, but as a responsibility. Something that needed to be maintained because the signal no longer felt like an object of study, but like a process that continued only as long as someone was there to witness it. What disturbed the teams most was not what the signal transmitted, but how it behaved in relation to human presence. Because careful comparison revealed that the signal subtly refined itself over time, becoming easier to detect, easier to interpret, almost as if it were learning the limits and habits of those who listened. And when monitoring stations were left unattended, the signal grew slightly less defined, not disappearing, but losing sharpness, as though attention itself acted as a kind of stabilizing force. And this observation was repeated often enough to remove doubt. Yet no one could explain how a signal crossing unimaginable distances could account for local human behavior. And privately, some listeners admitted a quiet discomfort. The sense that observation was no longer passive. That listening had become a shared act, and this idea spread slowly. Because it suggested that the signal did not exist independently of awareness, but in relation to it, adapting to perception the way a voice adjusts to a room. And while no physical danger was detected, a deeper unease took hold. Because it implied that the universe was not merely being observed by humanity, but was actively responding to the act of being noticed. Eventually, the distinction between sender and receiver began to blur. Not in data, but in experience, because listeners reported the growing sensation that the signal arrived with expectation. Not demand, but anticipation, as if it assumed someone would be there to hear it. And when shifts changed and new staff entered the room, the signal's clarity adjusted again, refining itself to new patterns of attention. And though official reports avoided such language, privately many describe the experience as being quietly acknowledged. Not personally, but collectively, as a species capable of sustained listening. And this realization carried a strange gravity, because it reframed first contact not as an event, but as a relationship built slowly through patience and presence. And as the signal continued unchanged in structure, yet alive in response, the most unsettling thought settled gently among those who listened. That the signal had never been searching blindly through space, but had been waiting for minds capable of noticing it without fear. And now that it had found them, it had no need to hurry, because listening itself had become the connection. And silence, once empty, had become something shared. At first, no one noticed when the signal stopped feeling strange, because familiarity arrived slowly, spreading through the listening teams like a quiet fog. And what had once felt extraordinary became routine. Another part of the long night spent watching numbers move across dark screens. And this was perhaps the most unsettling development of all, because humans are not meant to grow comfortable with the impossible. Yet the signal settled into daily schedules with ease, arriving gently and leaving without drama. And as weeks passed, the staff found themselves speaking about it the way one speaks about weather or tides. Predictable, steady, almost reassuring, even though nothing about it should have been. And during shifts, the signal played softly through monitoring systems, its rhythm calm and even, filling the room with a presence that felt less like sound and more like atmosphere. And while official logs showed no change, many listeners reported a growing sense that the signal carried weight. Not physical weight, but emotional gravity. As though attention itself became heavier while it was present. And this sensation followed them home, lingering in quiet rooms and half-sleep, where thoughts felt slower and deeper, and some described an odd comfort in it. A sense of being held in a larger awareness, while others felt unsettled by how natural it all began to seem, because nothing had changed in the signal structure. Yet something had changed in the way humans received it. And in that subtle shift, unnoticed by the outside world, the relationship between Earth and the deep space sender quietly moved from observation to familiarity, from discovery to coexistence. As familiarity deepened, small changes appeared in the listeners themselves. Not dramatic enough to cause alarm, but consistent enough to raise concern. Because people reported sleeping longer, yet waking more tired. Dreaming of vast empty spaces that felt full rather than empty. Spaces where distance had no meaning and time felt folded in on itself. And these dreams were strangely similar across different facilities, though no one spoke openly about that connection. And during waking hours, listeners found it harder to explain what they were hearing, even though the signal remained mathematically simple, as if the experience resisted language, slipping away when described. And psychologists noted subtle cognitive shifts. Slower speech, longer pauses, deeper focus. Yet no signs of distress or dysfunction, only adaptation. And when researchers tried to automate the listening entirely, removing humans from direct exposure, the signal weakened slightly, losing clarity and precision, as though deprived of something it required. And when human oversight returned, the signal sharpened again, restoring its former stability. And this pattern repeated often enough to suggest dependency, not technological, but perceptual, as if awareness itself played a role in maintaining the transmission. And this possibility unsettled even the most careful thinkers, because it implied that listening was no longer passive. That by paying attention, humans were participating in the signal's existence, shaping it simply by being present. And though no official conclusions were drawn, an unspoken understanding spread quietly among those involved, that whatever was happening was no longer one-sided. The decision to test absence was made carefully, framed as routine calibration, though everyone understood its true purpose. And for one full cycle, the listening stations remained silent, recording nothing, acknowledging nothing, leaving the signal unheard. And when it arrived, it behaved differently. Its rhythm slower, its pauses longer, as though searching for something that was no longer there. And when listening resumed, the signal adjusted again, but not completely, carrying a subtle distortion that lingered like a memory of loss. And this response caused a quiet shift in thinking, because it suggested not only awareness, but reaction, not only patience, but expectation. And the idea took hold that the signal had grown accustomed to being heard, that listening had become part of its environment. And with that realization came a soft, persistent unease. The understanding that contact was no longer defined by messages sent across space, but by attention shared across distance. And whatever existed in the dark between stars had begun to settle into the human act of listening itself. Not invading, not commanding, but adapting gently, shaping perception without force. And in that slow, quiet change, the most unsettling truth emerged, that something had not arrived suddenly from deep space, but had eased its way into human awareness so carefully that resistance no longer felt possible. At some point, without announcement or warning, the signal stopped changing, not abruptly and not with finality, but by settling into a form so steady it was almost indistinguishable from silence. And the listening teams noticed this only after several cycles had passed, when they realized that nothing new had been added, no adjustment made, no response offered, and yet the signal still arrived, still occupied its familiar place in the background of their work, like a presence that had finished speaking and now simply stayed. And this was more unsettling than any escalation could have been, because it suggested completion rather than interruption, as though whatever process had been unfolding had reached its intended state. And with that realization came a quiet uncertainty about whether anything more was expected from Earth, because every attempt to reply now felt unnecessary, even rude, like speaking after a conversation had already ended. And gradually, the project shifted from analysis to maintenance, from curiosity to quiet responsibility, because no one wanted to be the one who stopped listening first, not out of fear of consequences, but out of a deeper sense that the act of listening itself had become the point. And in that stillness, the signal no longer felt external, no longer felt like something arriving from deep space, but like a fixed feature of reality, as stable and unquestioned as gravity. And though nothing dramatic occurred, those closest to it understood that something irreversible had taken place, that humanity had crossed a threshold so gently it barely noticed the moment of passing. Outside the listening facilities, life continued unchanged. Seasons passed, cities grew louder, skies filled with aircraft and satellites, and the signal remained unknown to almost everyone, carefully shielded from public attention, not because it was dangerous, but because no one knew how to explain it without reducing it. And those who did know learned to live with a quiet division between the ordinary world and the deeper one they had touched. a division that showed itself in small ways. Longer pauses in conversation, deeper attention to silence. A tendency to listen more than speak. And while no measurable harm ever appeared, no illness, no breakdown, there was a subtle shift in perspective that could not be undone. A sense that the universe was no longer empty, not full of life in a dramatic sense, but full of awareness, layered and patient. And some listeners eventually left the project, returning to ordinary careers. Though they often described a lingering sensation, as if something vast had once leaned close and never fully leaned away, and as new generations took their place. Trained without ceremony, the signal remained unchanged. Steady, quiet, uninterested in novelty, and this consistency slowly transformed it from discovery into assumption. From anomaly into background, until it became possible to imagine that it had always been there, waiting not for technology, but for a species capable of sustained attention. In time, the most unsettling realization was not about the signal itself, but about what it had revealed, because it became clear that nothing had arrived. Nothing had crossed the distance between stars in the way humans once imagined. And instead, something had made contact simply by being present long enough to be noticed. By offering structure instead of instruction, patience instead of demand. And by doing so, it had changed the way humanity understood listening, turning it from a passive act into a shared space. And the signal never asked for worship, never offered knowledge, never threatened or promised. It only remained steady and aware, and in that constancy, it quietly reshaped the human relationship with silence. Because silence was no longer empty, no longer safe to ignore, but something that might be listening back. And so the world adjusted, slowly and without fear, to the idea that attention mattered, that awareness could be mutual, and that the universe did not need to speak loudly to be heard. And on quiet nights, when the sky looks unchanged and the stars give nothing away, the signal still arrives exactly on time, unchanged and unchanging, not as a warning and not as a greeting, but as a reminder that something answered once and never needed to speak again.